and welcome to the show. And thank you so much for being here. I love spending this time with you and being your spiritual friend, the one who's helping you understand and navigate these really changing times and what a changing time this is. To speak about that and to help us understand a little bit about what we're moving into as we look forward, I have invited my really good friend, Lars Mellis, to the show today. And Lars is awesome. I love Lars. Lars and I met when we both became board members of NCGR, the National Council for Geocosmic Research in Los Angeles. And so we'll give a shout out to Gay Nelson, who connected us. And then we also joined the board of the main organization. So Lars and I got to know each other really well during that time. In addition to being a very talented astrologer, Lars is also hilarious. He is a stand-up comedian. He is a tennis player. He is so multifaceted. He's worked in education. And I brought him on today because he wrote a book called Your Personal Horoscope 2025. And it's a month-by-month forecast for every sign. And this book is out, it just came out, and it really summarizes the significant transits and the main events for 2025. As you know, if you are a loyal listener to the show, and thank you so much if you are, as you know, we are getting ready to go into a period where there are a number of planets changing signs. We talked with Ann Ortley, we've talked in previous episodes. We have 5 outer planets changing signs between this year and 2026. That's a lot of transition. And it's a lot of transformational change. And to help unpack some of that, I invited Lars on, and we talk about the eclipses of 2025. We talk about the Neptune changing signs. We talk about some of those overarching themes that we're going to see transpire in our lives and in the world. A lot of people have asked me questions about, are we going into a civil war? We have Neptune returning back to the same point it was when the Civil War started in America and in the US. We have a number of planets. We have a lot of Aries influence, which can relate to military activity. And so we touch on that question. And we also touch on other questions like, what can you do to make the most of this time and of the next year? And what can we do to prepare right now? And Lars leaves us with a cosmic call to action that is very meaningful, and I can't wait to try it. So I will bring Lars on in just a minute, but I wanted to send one more reminder that I will be in New York at the Omega Institute for Modern Day Magic, Own Your Power and Shape Your Life. This is a really powerful retreat experience where you can go and do some deep personal growth, personal development, and you can also set intentions, learn more about how to work with rituals, learn more about the manifestation process, and connect with other people who are on a spiritual journey with you. It's awesome, you all. This is my 4th time teaching at the Omega Institute, and each time it's life-changing. So that's September 2nd through 6th, and you can visit eomega.org and learn more. I also wanted to announce and remind you that I will be on the Shift Network. Yay. And I'll be giving a class, a 7-week class on astrology and psychic mediumship. There'll be more information about that, but please tell all your friends, sign up, come. If you want to develop your own gifts, and if you want to learn more about how to work with the symbolism of astrology. Even if you don't know anything about astrology, this is a class that will help you. So those are my announcements. Thank you for giving me a chance to say them out loud. And now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming my good friend, Lars. So welcome, Lars. It's so great to have you here on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. You know how much I love you.
And it's mutual, definitely mutual. So, Lars, we have a lot to cover today. First of all, I just want to give a huge, huge shout out about your book. It's Your Personal Horoscope 2025. It's a month by month forecast for every sign. And first of all, you're just such a your writing style is very similar to the way I feel when I sit down and have a conversation with you. And that is, you are both really deep and really, everything you say is very meaningful. And I feel like there's a lot of wisdom in it, but you're also conversational and hilarious in some parts. So I just wanted to say, I really love the way you summarize the astrology in a way that most people could digest. And so I brought you onto the show today because I'm curious. You've looked into 2025 and you've really studied it and you wrote a book about it. And I wanted to hear from you, what are some of the major themes of astrology or of the astrology of 2025? So I would love to dive right in and get into that part of the conversation.
Perfect.
So,
I got my flippers on, ready to dive in.
All right. Great. And so, Lars, when you think about the astrology of 2025, if you could give it like one key word or one key phrase, what would that be?
I'm going to say one key word would be like transition for sure. If not that, if we want to go in a little bit more of a spiritual form of transition, I'd say transmute or alchemize essentially could be two words to really latch onto in regards to uncovering the potential in the astrology of 2025, given how many planets are really changing their tune and affecting societal shifts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And by planets changing their tune, you're talking specifically about the outer planets moving into new signs. Yeah, we had Anne Ortley on a few episodes ago, and she talked about 5 outer planets changing signs. We've talked about it here on the show several times, just the huge transition that we're in. So from your perspective, first of all, could you outline what does it mean when the outer planet changes signs, and which planets are changing signs?
Absolutely. So the outer planets affect society at large in a lot more of a noticeable shift. And they all rule over different concepts, different domains, if you will. And we'll break that down later. But essentially, we look to outer planets and their cycles to really understand what to expect in regards to what they're ushering in. And astrology is a study of cycles at the end of the day. So we look back to the last time that planet was in that sign. We look back to what that planet rules and sort of what the themes and developments that occurred were to better anticipate what we're going to be moving into. And we have Saturn moving into Aries for the first time, since it entered Aries 29 years ago. Saturn has a roughly 28 and a half, 29 year cycle. And then we have Uranus, which is, we're talking about the real slow movers now with Uranus. And Uranus has an 84-year cycle, and it's moving into Gemini. And then we have Neptune, which if you thought Uranus was slow, Neptune is even slower. It has a 160-year cycle and is completing its tour of the zodiac, and it's going into Aries once again.
Yeah. And I just want to reiterate for people, anyone who listens, our loyal listeners know what a powerful degree that 0 degrees Aries point is. So when we talk about Saturn and we talk about Neptune crossing that degree, not once, but they're going to go back and forth over that degree 3 times. That's what's called a world point. Can you speak to the importance of that particular degree of the zodiac?
Yeah, of course. In viewing astrology as a study of cycles, right? Touring the entire zodiac is really going and completing a full cycle. And then there's an element of death and rebirth from a metaphorical context, for sure. There's an element of completion or culmination, and then essentially coming into a new state of being that happens when you go from 29 degrees of Pisces after going through all 360 degrees of zodiac and then starting over from 0. If you think about 0 degrees Aries as well, and Aries being the first sign and being very much about the self and being about sort of the one. It was the first one. It was the only one at one point, essentially. 0 degrees is really about 0 degrees Aries is about fresh beginnings.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Yes. Yeah. It is that, I think about it in terms of that taking a leap of faith, the Fool card in the tarot deck, which doesn't have a direct correlation. But when I think of that 0 degrees Aries point, it is the looking over the cliff and saying, am I going to take a leap of faith? Am I going to jump? Knowing that you have everything that you need, knowing that you've got the support that you need. And, and I think, would you say that all signs or all individuals are going to be feeling this? Are some signs going to be feeling this more than others?
Yeah, I think on the collective level, everyone will be feeling this.
Mm-hmm.
An Aries mantra that I hold very close to my heart is I with myself.
Ooh, I like that.
At the end of the day, the relationship with ourselves are really what is up for review when you get this scrutiny, when you get this buildup in the sign of Aries. But of course, we're talking about the cardinal signs here. And you could argue the fire signs as well, given the relationship of Aries being a fire sign. But in my opinion, squares and oppositions are more profoundly felt, in my opinion, whether on the internal with the square or just like feeling like you're getting batted over the head with an opposition. So I would say the Aries, Libra, Cancer, Capricorn axes specifically would be, if you have placements in early degrees of Aries, Libra, Cancer, Capricorn, then this is a big year in regards to transmuting this astrological or cosmic scrutiny into gold.
With the North Node moving through Aries right now, I think we might be getting a preview of what to expect as Neptune and Saturn move into Aries. It's almost as if the North Node, which is that point that relates to our collective learning and growing, it's like pushing our growth edge and our evolution, that is sort of paving the way for these planets. And one thing that we tend to see with the North Node's transit through Aries, and one thing we have definitely seen in the time that it's been there, has been a growth and an acceleration in military activity. And now that it's more visible with technology, we have more access to seeing the horrors of war. And I think, it's not lost on me that the last time that Neptune was moving through Aries or making a movie, actually, as soon as it entered Aries, it was at the very start of the Civil War.
Right.
And so I think a lot of people are, asking me in my practice, are we headed for a civil war? Are we going into World War III? Like, what is going to be happening when we know that Aries is a sign that relates to armed conflict? So put on your visionary cap right now. And what are some possibilities we might see? First of all, as you were preparing for this, were you thinking that this is a possibility?
I love your line of questioning here, because these are questions that you should be asking astrologers, right? In looking at these transits. And in my opinion, I have not read the Bible from cover to cover by any means, but I do understand that love thy neighbor is a big tenet that is throughout both the Old and the New Testament, potentially. At the end of the day, what I'm trying to say is that I'm really hoping that people really cling tightly to love thy neighbor, because the year starts off with a Mars retrograde in Cancer, which is one of the most patriotic, nationalistic signs. Knowing that January has an inauguration in it, in my opinion, with that Mars retrograde in Cancer, since Mars will move back into Cancer on the 6th of January, unintentionally on that date, of course. But I think that the year starts off tensely, in my opinion. I think that there is there's definitely a lot of scrutiny around the themes of tribalism and the themes of I versus you, essentially, instead of a collective us. I think that is my biggest concern about all the Pisces energy shifting to Aries, is that Pisces represents the collective, and then Aries represents the individual and the I, and arguably the ego, right?
Right.
So these are going to be some major questions or things that we're going to be grappling with. So
Mhm.
just want to pause there to kind of set the scene. How does that resonate with you? Do you have to, what would you add to that?
Yeah. I think that's accurate. I mean, I think that what we've seen with Neptune's move through Pisces is a rise in people leaning more toward spiritual expansion in whatever ways that takes shape. And you're absolutely right about I agree with you about the Mars retrograde and how that could really cause people to dig their heels into their beliefs, into their sense of separateness.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that Mars and Aries both relate to is boundaries. It's not necessarily how do we set up boundaries or what walls are we building, but it's how are we protecting our walls.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that is something that we could see. Could you talk a little bit about Mars retrograde at the beginning of the year? I think that's interesting, and you're right. We have an inauguration here in this country right at that time. So yeah, what are your thoughts about Mars retrograde?
Yeah, so I think just to lay out for the people who aren't professional astrologers or don't, really know much about astrology, Mars has everything to do with conflict, drive, ambition, assertion. It's very forward moving. Mm-hmm. And that's when Mars is very direct and moving at a normal pace or a quick pace. And when Mars is retrograde and it's slow, a lot of that is directed inwards. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of, it can get, the overarching vibe would be frustrating, restless, and kind of like road rage. I live in Los Angeles. You're at the 101 at 5 p.m. essentially, like, you want to get home and you can't get home essentially. And so that is how a Mars retrograde is typically expressed. And what it's meant to do is force us to confront our relationship with conflict, the way in which we approach conflict, the way in which we sit with conflict. Do you react instead of respond? Like, what is your confrontation and conflict style? And I think this applies on the countrywide stage, when it comes to this specific Mars retrograde, because it is going to be for most of January and then for the 3 weeks in February that it's retrograde in the sign related to nationalism, in the sign related to patriotism and what it means to be patriotic in our country. So it's very likely, in my opinion, that those are going to be the overarching pressing themes tied to how that translates to conflict and how you approach conflict.
Is there anything else that you wanted to say about that? Or
no, I think okay. That was a good place to pause and just hear sort of your reflection based on that.
Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think, it's really funny. One of my friends, Bonnie Gillespie, talks about Mars in Cancer. And she says, if Mars is the planet that is I'm going to fight or how I fight, Cancer is in the sign of the nurturer, in the sign of the archetypal mother is I'm going to go on the battlefield and bring my brownies, bring everybody a brownie, So it's like Mars and Cancer doesn't really have that much fire. It doesn't have enough of it can be kind of frustrated, like building up some of that energy, building like a pent up energy, like you were saying.
Right. Mars, from a traditional standpoint, doesn't necessarily enjoy being in Cancer. I view actually Mars in Cancer to be really, given that Cancer has associations with the family, that Mars in Cancer is one of the most tribal Mars placements as a result of that. And while I totally agree in regards to the brownie motif for sure and how Mars is expressed, I would also argue there is an element, especially with this Mars retrograde, of Caroline Manzo from The Real Housewives of New Jersey, when she says something along the lines of like, you don't mess with my family, my family, thick as thieves. Yeah. Like that's essentially the vibe, in my opinion, that we're going to really be seeing around the inauguration. And people's genuine concern, what they're fighting for is their tribe, their family, essentially. Yes. I think that when Mars is direct in Cancer, there's a beautiful expression of how you can show up for your family, how you can, have a drive and a purpose in life for your family or as a result of your family. But when it's retrograde, it can be a little frustrated, as you mentioned.
So, but Mars goes back into Leo, so Mars starts in Leo, goes back into Cancer.
Yes, yeah.
And so it's in Cancer at the start of the year, and then it goes back, and then it goes back into Leo in April. So wow, we have Mars in Cancer for that first quarter of the year.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's a defining feature, in my opinion, of the first quarter of the year is Mars just being in the same sign.
Yeah. And, I think that speaks to what we might see too with the inauguration, depending on who wins the election. And at this point right now, where we are in the process, we're recording this in July, and we haven't had that Mars-Uranus conjunction, which, there's a lot that's going to be changing between now and November. I mean, I think there's going to be a lot of, who knows? We're going to stay tuned. But, so we don't quite know where we'll be at that time, and what regardless of the outcome of the election, I think instead of it just being about the country and tribalism in the country, I think it could be tribalism to a political party, to an ideology, and seeing ourselves more in terms of more in terms of the party that we belong to.
Right. And in the context of the story itself, I feel like once Saturn moves into Aries, there's kind of this, not necessarily a judgment, but there is a vibe of take responsibility for yourself and for your actions up until this point.
Yeah.
I really do view Saturn in Aries as the only person who can save you is you, and you are responsible for your actions, right? So I do think that there's an element of accountability that comes also with that.
And what's happening in the very background is that Pluto is fully in Aquarius.
Great point out, for sure.
So all of these outer planets are moving from earth signs and water signs into fire and air. And, one of the main features of Pluto and Aquarius so far has been the development and the ubiquity of AI technology. And now, I just was listening to a podcast the other day, and they were talking about how AI is being used in military operations. And in Ukraine right now, it's helping their limited resources and their limited, military team, their limited access to soldiers and equipment. It's actually helping them to give Russia more of a fight. And so I think, Pluto and Aquarius is a technological revolution.
Agree with that.
And so do you want to say anything about Pluto and Aquarius as it relates to all these other planets that are changing signs?
Yeah, I think it's important to note that when our election occurs in November of this year, Pluto will that'll be the last little bit of time where we don't have Pluto and Aquarius, which, as we've seen with elections currently with Pluto and Aquarius, has absolutely correlated to more of a shift towards the collective or progressivism, for sure. And Capricorn has a lot to do with the status quo and tradition and stuff. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Regardless, at the end of the day, we are going to be voting for, as of right now, we have two candidates that are old white men. And that is as Capricorn, I feel like, as you can get.
Yes.
For sure. So it could just like the Pluto and Capricorn could simply mean that, or it could mean other things. That being said, I think Pluto and Aquarius going into next year really has a lot to do with, as I mentioned, the keyword being transition and being one of the background factors that's really pushing us forward and ushering us into kind of a new age, a new era. And you bring up a really good point, the role of technology in that. With Uranus moving into Gemini, which is the sign of communication, also one could argue has a lot to do with education as well, and how they're going to be supporting one another, given the fact that they're both in early degrees of air signs. I think we're going to see kind of an exponential increase in regards to how AI interweaves into the facet of communication and education like we maybe didn't even expect. And that doesn't necessarily all occur in 2025, but 2025 is the launch pad, is what I'm trying to say for that.
I love that. I didn't even think about it in terms of education. I've thought about it in terms of media. I've thought about it in terms of transportation, because we're already seeing like previews. I subscribe to all these like geeky science kind of magazines and, technology things. Mostly because I like to see astrological trends, like the seedling of trends before before the astrology changes.
Right.
And, there's so much right now about flying cars and about, really rethinking our roadway system, looking beyond high speed rail. And so I've been looking forward to the way that Uranus and Gemini is going to relate to us getting from one place to another in a more efficient and more ecologically sound manner. But I didn't even think about it in terms of how we take in information and how we're accessing reading materials, news. And I think that education, are we going to be using virtual reality for education? Are our teachers going to actually be avatars? I think there's like so many possibilities for how this evolves.
Right.
And I know we're not tying in the ethics of this, and I know that that's a whole other conversation. So I just wanted to speak to that there's going to be a lot of gray area around all of this technological revolution, the scientific revolution, space revolution that we see with Pluto and Aquarius. But a lot of those regulatory considerations take effect during that Pluto period of time.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You're speaking to a double Sag. So, of course, education is going to be top in the 9th house. So education, of course, is going to be top of my mind for sure. And I'm a former educator myself.
Yes, you are.
So, in my opinion, when I was writing the book, that was one lens in which I was really looking at in regards to how Uranus and Gemini will influence all of the signs in its own unique way based on where in one's chart Uranus and Gemini will be transiting during its stay there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, beautiful. So Uranus and Gemini is big. And I wanted to just give everybody a little bit of a retrospective with Uranus as it moved into the last couple of signs. So when Uranus entered Aries, this was a time when selfies came out and YouTube really took off. And so people were captured using technology, because Uranus relates to technology. And it also relates to connection, how we connect with one another, how we connect with larger groups and systems. And so when Uranus was in Aries, we were broadcasting ourselves all over, and we were doing selfies were like the big thing. Then Uranus moved into Taurus, and technology really centered around how are we caring for the earth? How are we, regenerative agriculture became a very big theme. Biomimicry became something that came out into the mainstream, where a lot of us who had been in those circles, like following these things for many years, were finally like, oh, yay, we have our day. We did away with, we started at least labeling genetically modified organisms, GMOs, on food. And so there's a lot that changed within Taurus. Also, fashion technology has changed. Taurus relates to fashion. It relates to design. AI technology is now helping us with design. Products like Canva came out. So we're all doing our beautification and branding beautification, technological beautification, and it's all accessible for us right now. And so when we talk about Uranus moving into Gemini, we're talking about how technology shifts and opens up possibilities for us in those Gemini sectors, like education, like transportation, like communications, media, and other things in that realm.
Absolutely. And the other facet of Uranus and Taurus, which I'm going to be very interested to see how it translates when Uranus puts on its Gemini costume, is the role of financial technology.
Yes. Oh,
right?
yes. I'm so glad you brought that up. Absolutely.
Yeah, like the way in which people keep their money, and also cryptocurrency, and like
Yeah.
how, like, when I think it's important for the listeners to know that just because a planet shifts signs doesn't mean that everything that it was up to in the previous sign just stops. It's not a light switch. If anything, it carries that in, and there's a story that it tells as a result, and it influences,
Mhm.
the next chapter, if you will. And so I really am interested in kind of the influence of the meteoric rise of financial technology and the ways that people view money through a technological lens, how that impacts Uranus in Gemini, which has everything to do with the ways in which we communicate and educate.
Yes, I love that. Such an important point. I want to shift back to Saturn for a second, Lars,
Absolutely.
because planets have essential dignities, which means that in some signs, planets are really happy because they relate to the themes of that sign. They feel right at home. And in other signs, they don't have as much dignity because they can't relate to that sign. So I loved the word that you use, costume. It's
Mhm.
like putting a short person in a big clown costume,
Yeah.
and so, Saturn is it's exalted in Libra, and it's in its fall in Aries. So
Right.
Saturn's going to be in one of those uncomfortable costumes next year. Do you have anything that you want to say about Saturn in Aries and Saturn not having as much dignity?
Yeah. I just think, just to reiterate my point, is I being a gay man growing up in the 2000s, I was really influenced by Tyra Banks, and she is
I love it.
she is almost most well known for one particular moment on America's Next Top Model, where she's yelling at a contestant, and she says something along the lines of, like, nobody's going to take responsibility for you if you don't take responsibility for yourself, right? Like, you go to bed at night, you lay there, and what are you doing about it, essentially? And in my opinion, given that Saturn has everything to do with responsibility, and Saturn has to do with limiting patterns of thought and behavior on the individual level, and then on the collective level, and it's in the sign of I with myself. I think that it's going to be uncomfortable for a lot of people to really have to look in the mirror. In my opinion, like, that is a big expression of it. It's going to be pulling off the cover over Dorian Gray's painting for a lot of people, and really confronting the true reality of sort of what their actions have led to.
Right, right. Yeah, because Saturn relates to rules and law and order and the social structures in our culture that help to build stable society. So these are all Saturn words: stable, structured, you know. And so, yes, I think, you're right. The Saturn can be the planet of consequences, and consequences are great if you've been, working hard and committed to a project, and you've been giving it your all, or you've been falling in love and so faithful and loving to your partner, then it's like you get the reward of going deeper into the relationship. Or in the first example, you get the reward of some kind of recognition. So the consequences can be really, positive experiences when we're talking about Saturn. But then on the other side, if you haven't been as dedicated, or if you've been, sort of slacking off or not living in integrity, then those consequences can be what you're saying. You have to take responsibility for your actions. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Precisely. Yes. Yeah. I would totally agree with that.
Okay, cool. So the other thing that I like to look at when looking at 2020, looking at the year ahead, is I think we can tell a lot about the year by looking at where the eclipses are.
Amen. 100%.
And I know eclipses are your thing. You love it. Every time Lars and I have done this with Gay Nelson, an NCGR, LA NCGR chapter, Every year, for the last few years, we've done an overview, like a panel discussion at the first part of the year. And Lars is always signing up, raising his hand for taking on eclipses.
Absolutely.
And you're really good at delineating eclipses.
Thank you.
So we have the eclipses in March and September of next year. And these are eclipses that are happening on the Virgo Pisces axis line.
I believe it's in Aries, right?
Yes, there's one. The March 29th one is in Aries.
Right.
So, but yes, the 14th, March 14th is the one in Virgo, and it's a lunar eclipse. Then March 29th is a solar eclipse in Aries, and September 7th is the lunar eclipse in Pisces, and September 21st is the lunar eclipse in Virgo. Ooh, at 29 degrees. 29 degrees of Virgo, of a mutable sign. That's a very powerful degree.
That is.
So what kinds of themes do you think we will see with the eclipses in these signs?
Yeah, what we're going to be observing is there's going to be a big shift from the eclipses that we have been navigating, which have been in Aries and Libra, which have a lot to do with I with myself and I with another. It has a lot to do with relationships, relationship between yourself and the relationship with another. And then we're having 3 of the 4 eclipses next year be in Virgo and Pisces, which that axis has a lot to do with essentially the tangible and the intangible. There's going to be a kind of like a big referendum in regards to spirituality, the role of spirituality, and how that plays into the mainstream for sure. In addition to that, Virgo has so much to do with like physical health and routines, and Pisces would have a lot to do with the spiritual health and the mental health component of things. So I do think that there's going to be so much awareness in regards to how our actions, how our daily life, how our production, like influences or affects our physical health and then our mental health as well, you could argue.
That's such a good analysis. I always think of this axis line as being about embodiment. So you have Virgo, which is the sign of the daily rituals that we fill our lives with, but also ritual practices and service and kind of the boots on the ground aspect of service and of making those connections that are outside our own scope of influence. And then we have Pisces, which, as you so beautifully said, is the sign of universality. So it's the sign of seeing ourselves as one, merging with the mystical realms, merging with other people, collectivity, humanitarianism, and so you have this real contrast where the North Node is going to be in Pisces. So that's where we're all focusing on and paying attention to. And you spoke to that with regard to the spirituality. And then that South Node is in Virgo. And I think of Virgo as like cleaning up the details. And so it literally, Virgo rules the intestines. So it's separating what's necessary and essential and nutritive from what's waste.
Yeah.
And wherever the South Node is, that's what we're seeing. We're seeing the shadow aspects of those things come into the light. And an example of this, I think, that is going to be more visible in the next few years while we are cleaning up those Virgo things. There's so much talk right now about PFAS, forever chemicals, in our water systems, and all the ways in which we need to update our water purification, sewage, all of those things to account for pesticides and medicines and chemicals and forever chemicals and all of these things that leach into our water supply. So it's, I think water will probably be another one of those focal points that we're looking at as we also look at, the metaphor of water, which is our emotions. And are we feeling our emotions? And are we ritualizing our experience of grief and death and dying? And are we creating rite of passage rituals? I think spirituality is going to be such a big focal point in 2025.
Absolutely. Yeah, spirituality. And I love that you bring up a couple of points with Virgo, one of which is the ritual component to it. Given all of the transition that is occurring next year, we know that the primary way to anchor ourselves when we're in a period of transition, astrology removed, is to maintain as much of your routines as you can. And I think that we're going to really be like developing or cultivating routines which fit into this new world order that we're moving into with all of these societal shifts that the outer planet shifting signs bring. And in addition to that, one important facet of Virgo that you brought up was how it's really about trying to sift out the waste of things and really see what is valuable. Virgo is a Mercury ruled sign at the end of the day. And I actually associate it. William Perry has a theory of cognitive development, and he talks about that the highest level of cognitive development for a student, since he was a student development researcher, is someone who is able to listen to ideas, weigh them, and then develop an opinion about what ideas they can sift out and what actually has merit. And I think that my biggest hope is that with the South Node being in Virgo and it being really tied to cleanup, knowing that Uranus is moving into Gemini, there's going to be so many new forms of communication and ways in which we get educated that maybe we're finding fail-safes, or maybe we're finding ways to be able to sift through what is not real. Since there's going to be even more, question marks about what is real and what is not real and what we're being shown.
I love that. That really resonates because as Saturn's been moving through Pisces, which really does blur the lines of what's real and what's not, Saturn being the planet that relates to reality and the tangible terrestrial reality of our lives. As Saturn's been moving through Neptune, we have seen, and moving through Pisces rather, and Neptune's been moving through Pisces, we've seen a major development in the film industry, and look at AI and the warning signs about AI being we now have the power to change people's voices, to create these videos and these sound bites that sound and look just like a person, but they're computer generated.
Right.
And so I think I'm going to stick with you on that hopeful message that perhaps the South Node in Virgo is going to show us some of the ways that we can either, I'm a policy person, so the ways that we can regulate things like, media and AI, and also the ways that we can clean up some of those storytelling devices or fields that might have a lot of gray areas as we continue to move into Pluto and Aquarius, that cycle.
Yes, absolutely.
So Lars, you know so much about astrology, and you've given this little hints about your time in education. And I don't think a lot of people know that you are also a tennis player and a comedian, and so I would love for you to just tell a little bit about your story and how you came to astrology.
For sure. It is, I am happy to humble myself. I think some of the best astrologers that I've met have come from being skeptics to becoming great professional astrologers. I think of Sam Reynolds as one of those people. And I'm raised by scientists from New York. And I moved to Los Angeles and was going to continue doing stand-up comedy, essentially. And one thing I really wanted to lambast, essentially, was astrology. And so,
no way.
Yeah. And then I met a friend who I had never met before, and she started to give me, her own consultation without being a professional astrologer. And it was, even with just her consultation, it provided me with such pause, an ability for introspection, and an ability to kind of find a new tool in order to navigate life that I could, really help not only be my best self, but understand the workings of the world in a new way. And I was really humbled by that, which motivated me to then go see a professional astrologer who absolutely, quote unquote, ripped my wig off, essentially, in regards to just saw me in a way that no one else would have, like, in and out, and really be able to unlock my soul's purpose, be able to unlock a way in which I feel like I not only can navigate life for myself, but provide others with guidance too. And that was when I moved to LA in 2015. That was 2016. And so I've been on this journey now for 8 years. I am a heavy ninth house Sagittarius stellium, all of which to say is that I love to learn and I love certification. So, deep dive into that. I then was elected to board of directors of NCGR with you. And I am now on another governing body that does certification for another big astrology exam. And all of which to say is that this is, in my lifeblood now. And I've seen the ways in which it has positively influenced my life as a tool that I can use to navigate life.
I love that. I love that. And I think your book offers a lot of that kind of guidance that you're talking about to your readers.
Mm-hmm.
And I just can't stress enough how funny Lars is.
Yeah.
Well, do you still perform? You're still performing, right? Stand up.
I am.
Yeah?
I'm juggling a couple of different careers right now, so it's when I have the time. But in August, I'm going to be performing. I'm actually doing an astrology themed comedy show in October, which hopefully I'm going to have you at as well. I assume you'll be talking about that when I can come to fruition on the pod later on.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's definitely, at the end of the day, it's another thing that's interwoven in the fabric of my being. And I think that humor and comedy is a way to deliver insight and deliver profound messages in a digestible way. And so that was my goal with the book. 2025 is a big year.
Yeah.
Point blank, astrologically, we see that, right? And so my goal with the book was for it to be an enjoyable reading experience that people could really think about the ways they can better themselves in the midst of all of this transition that's occurring next year.
Mm-hmm. What signs do you think have it? Do you have, could you give just one or two words of wisdom for each sign?
I can. I'm going to go ahead, actually, and tell you. So I added a facet of this book that I think is, new for astrology books, which is exactly what you're describing. Is I give every sign something called a totem. And that totem is what you can hold on to and remembering, what you're meant to embody for the year, or how I view the sign really navigating the year. So I'm happy to tell you what the totems of the 12 signs are.
Yeah, please.
And so we'll start with Aries. So Aries is the diamond, and important to think about how diamonds are formed. I think that's really the overarching theme for Aries. Taurus is the gymnast. You have Gemini, which is the trendsetter. Cancer is the alchemist. Leo is the knight. Virgo is the principal. You have Libra, which is the pugilist. And I was thinking in terms of Rocky Balboa, and I was thinking about that Rocky montage of him running up the stairs and getting ready for the fight. There's a lot going on for Libra in regards to that. And then we have Scorpio, which is the bon vivant. We have Sagittarius, which is the mighty oak and the oak tree. I had a huge oak tree outside my childhood home, and I think embodying the themes of the robustness and the rootedness is going to be very important for Sagittarius. Capricorn is the orator. Aquarius is the seeker. And then I have Pisces as the protagonist.
Ooh, I love that. I love that.
So if you want to know why your sign
you gotta
is
read
that totem, you got to read.
As you look at the astrology of 2025, what do you think we can all do to really make the most of the energies of 2025?
Yeah, that's a deep question for sure. Is this the call to action?
Not yet.
Okay, cool. No. So then I won't give my call to action answer. I think that, what we can all do to embody the energies of 2025 is, in my opinion, I think what's going to be really important, given the buildup of Aries energy with both Saturn and Neptune, entering Aries, and then we have Gemini. We have Uranus moving into Gemini. Is listen. I think that we really need to do a good job of listen and not listen in order to figure out what you're going to say. Like, I really think we need to listen to understand the other, whatever the other party is in the discussion, the argument, the skirmish, the confrontation, whatever it might be, on an individual level, on a collective level, like in regards to like it being a country or being a tribe or whatever. Like, I think that the best thing that you can do in order to leverage the astrology in a to alchemize the astrology and turn it into gold would be to listen, to understand, and not listen just to get your next word in.
I love that. Yeah, that feels right. Just, because of what we were sharing before about how Aries can be so individualistic, and also with Cancer, with Mars in Cancer retrograde at the first part of the year, us having that tribalism mentality. I think it could be really easy for us to put up walls and defenses that keep us from really connecting with one another.
Absolutely.
Beautiful. Well, Lars, I like to leave everybody with a call to action, something that they can do to really bring the insights and the wisdom that you shared today home in an embodied way. So do you have a cosmic call to action that you'd like to leave us with?
For sure. Yeah, I think in looking at 2025, I've never been a resolution guy myself, but in thinking about 2025 and thinking about what I mentioned specifically with Saturn moving into Aries and needing to take responsibility for yourself, and in thinking about using these totems as kind of like grounding agents to really understand what your sign is called to do, I would encourage every person to pick 2 to 3 words that they seek to embody for 2025, based on everything that we've talked about, based on what you read in the book, based on what based on what Rachel, you talk about in future pods about 2025, essentially, what 2 or 3 words do you want to embody in 2025 and integrate them as a routine? We're dealing with the South Node in Virgo, right? Integrate them into your spiritual practice when you're meditating, integrate them into, a mantra practice, a journaling practice, like really interweave them into your routine, to the fabric of who you are in 2025, because you get what you are, not what you want. So it's really about embodying that.
I love that. I love that.
Thank you.
You get what you are. That's beautiful, Lars.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you so much.
I'm honored. Thank you so much for having me. You are
and I'm definitely going to have you back. I'm thinking about doing a whole discussion, a whole panel on 2025 in December or January to really get like other perspectives. So I would love to have you back. And is your book available now? Is it available on?
Yeah, it's available for pre-order on Amazon and everywhere that you can get books. So I know it's on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. And also, you can ask your local seller as well, if they carry it as well. And yeah, it's everywhere.
All right. So Your Personal Horoscope 2025, month by month forecast for every sign. And Lars Mellis is the author. Where can people find you, Lars, if they'd like to schedule a consultation or if they'd like to learn more about your work?
Would love that. Well, I love rhymes, so my website is larsstars.com, and you can also find me on Instagram at Lars_stars. Someone took Lars Stars, unfortunately, but I know, right? It's so rude. But it's Lars_stars. I tend to make weekly videos. I like to call myself a cosmic weatherman. If you listen to Anne Orderly, she's my inspiration for that, in regards to looking at astrology as the weather. And so I talk a lot about that. And my consultations are pretty in-depth, for sure. So check out my website, larsstars.com, for those.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Lars. And thank you for being on the show.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for all you do. I love you so much.
I love you.